one thing I also wanted to understand from you is, as a writer, how do you describe the readership within African diaspora? I mean, how much are people really reading?
Well, this is something that I really think was one of the myths of publishing, maybe, I don't know, 50, 100 years ago. I don't know. There seemed to be this perception that people in the diaspora were not reading. And for me, that isn't reality for me. Like I said, I do accept that we have an oral tradition when it comes to storytelling, where our stories have tended to be beyond describable. They've been beyond the level of text. And, we are voracious readers and storytellers. I'm not sure if that was something that was appreciated in the global community and the global publishing industry 100 years ago. But certainly, I think that's something that's being recognized now. For me, what has been interesting has been trying to marry that oral tradition with the kind of scribal, the sort of writing down a story. Um, and for me, I have elements in my book where I try to elevate the text to that level because I actually think the oral tradition is more advanced than just writing the story down. Um, Even though writing the story is what international publishing and tends to be valued and so on in the so-called first world. I really think that the oral storytelling tradition has a number of advantages, including more active participation by the recipients of the story in the telling and the experience of the story itself. Um, so one of the things that I did, for example, in How the One Armed Sister Sweeps Her House is I have a main character, Lala. That's how we would say it if we read it. But really, if you read this story, her name cannot be said. It can only be sung. Um, and that I think that challenges maybe certain, I don't want to say Western traditions, because I do feel that early Western traditions had oral storytelling and understood oral storytelling as well. Um, the oral tradition in storytelling. But for me, this is one of the ways that I kind of start to reach back to that knowledge because, that was a mind trip for me. And I don't know how readers see it, but maybe when you try to read the text aloud, then you have to kind of stop and say, well, how do you really say this woman's name in truth? Like, how is it possible? I am fascinated by the idea of being able to speak with a drum. And this is almost like a derivation of that or some sort of association. Because when you start to read this story, once you read it and you hear that a big part of this story is Lala's husband trying to sing her name to her in the right way. So it's almost as if we kind of reaching back to understand that there's an elevated way of communication that our ancestors know about. So how you could read this name and you would read it as Lala, but the real name has to be sung in order to be authentic. So um yeah, for me that is I can't even remember how we got around to talking about that, but that is definitely one of the advantages that I think our tradition has on, a tradition of just writing down the stories and depending on the text. There's a performative aspect of our storytelling that I think is magic. And that's how I try to incorporate it. One of the ways in my book.
Thank you so much for that. It's good that more people should keep reading, so at least they understand the importance of the message that is being left here for them. Thank you so much for that. I appreciate that. All right. Towards the beginning of the conversation, you did make mention of the thesis that you write in your PhD. I don't know if you want to say something more about that, particularly as it relates to women. Yeah, anything you want to say about that?
Well, for me, one of the things that I found or that I observed and seemed to be backed up by the research is that a lot of our approaches and attitudes to gender-based violence and specifically violence against women, domestic violence against women, is based on a patriarchal view of the world, and a patriarchal structuring of society, um, and values, community values. Um, and I wondered whether it was possible, like I said, to write about um, gender-based violence and specifically domestic violence against women, to write about it in a way that not only reflected the reality of what is happening in the Caribbean, but also represented violence in a way that was not reduced to the level of spectacle, and also encouraged some of those questions, um, and reflections that I hoped would lead to change. And so that is one of the things that I consciously sought to do in this book, in my creative work, but also that formed a big part of my research. And one of the things that came out was, this sort of patriarchal positioning and performance of gender contributed greatly to the scourge of domestic violence, especially in the Caribbean, and also um, that our silence around it seemed to assist in its perpetuation. Um, and you will see, in How the One Armed Sister Sweeps Her House, for example, Wilma herself is a victim of a type of violence and exploitation that doesn't allow her to be able to have a certain type of conversation with her daughter Esme and then with her granddaughter Lala. And we see that cycle of violence um, continue through the generations. And part of it, I think, is because of that silence. So, in a lot of ways, my academic research sort of informed and enriched each other in that process of working on my thesis. And it really was an eye-opening process for me. Very, very much something that I'm passionate about, and intend to pursue further as it relates to the plight of women, not only in the Caribbean, but globally.